All right. So I know some people are still filtering in, but I just want to say thank you so much for listening and having me today. I'm really excited. This is my first presentation at a workshop. So I'm super excited. If I'm a little nervous, just bear with me. But today I'm talking to you guys about how to incorporate self-advocacy and anything related to guardianship and rights into your curriculum. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys is just a little bit of background about my classroom. I have an awesome classroom. So I am a transition program for young adults with disabilities ages 18 to 22, and we have what's called a third-party contract agreement with VR. So part of our program is funded through vocational rehabilitation. Our students have graduated with their diploma, and then we have them for those last few years, and we are located on a technical center campus, which is great because I think it kind of helps with that. You know, you're an adult now, it's a different mindset, goes right hand in hand with that transfer of rights. I have, starting in the fall, 38 students, 3 teachers, and 4 case specialists. My case specialists are partly funded through VR as well, and they act as job coaches in the community and job developers, and then in the classroom they assume the role of a paraprofessional. My curriculum entails everything listed, anything relating to employability and independence. We visit multiple non-paid work training sites throughout the week that we take data on, and we submit that to VR, and then we kind of work together with VR to find that perfect fit for the student through other employment agencies as well. And I have a variety of disabilities, which of course, as we all know, requires a lot of differentiation. So I'm even thinking of, me and Abby are thinking of breaking up our group into like 3 levels this year. But we genuinely believe that every level of our students can be taught self-advocacy skills. It's a pretty abstract concept, so that can be difficult to teach to our students, but as much hands-on stuff as we can do, I think will help them. All right, and you should have gotten a few handouts to kind of go along with my presentation. They're just some things, I'll reference them while I'm speaking, just to keep an eye on as I work through. But I'm gonna break my presentation up into 3 sections. So first, I'm gonna show you guys kind of what I did, how I taught my students about self-determination and self-advocacy, and then I'm gonna break into techniques on how to teach students about the specific laws and rights and helping them learn how to make their decisions. And then the most fun part is I'm going to role play with Anna and Daniel how to run a self-directed IEP and how to bring up that conversation about transfer of rights within the IEP meeting. Sound good? Okay, great. And again, these are the activities. So before I received the Developing Abilities workbook, these are the activities that I did with my students, and then they had that knowledge when they came and did the workshop. So that's what Amelia was saying earlier. It was really cool because my students were already educated based on what we did. So I feel confident that we did a good job teaching them. I always set up my lessons, just a general reminder, I always do direct teaching first, I do guided practice activities, and then I always leave time for independent practice. So you're gonna follow the same model when teaching self-advocacy and self-determination, because it does need to be explicitly taught. So I just wanted to kind of preface with that. And please stop me if you have any questions. So we're going to jump into our first step of the direct teaching, and you'll see one of the things that was passed out was a follow along fill in the blank worksheet kind of packet thing. So I'm really lucky because of all my staff I have. I break my students into groups, and I usually have at least one staff member sitting at the table with my students so that they could direct the students, you know, this is where you fill in or whatever. So you'll see some keywords that the students would need to fill in to make sure that they're paying attention. So, of course, it's important to let your students know. So this is literally the presentation I did with my students, and I'm just showing you guys. I want my students to understand what self-determination is, understand what their rights are, identify some rights they have as young adults, and then teaching them explicitly how to communicate their needs and wants. I think sometimes I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, our students need to actually practice saying those things. So saying, I need help, or saying, can you repeat that? That doesn't make sense to me. One thing I was really proud of is we do a mock interview day, and some of the interviewers were saying, your student asked me to clarify the question, and that was just huge. You know, we have to ask for clarification all the time, so teaching our students that they need that skill as well. And then just explaining to students what self-determination means, so like a little pre-teaching of vocabulary. It just means a person can make their own decisions and plan their future. They get to determine how their money is spent. And ultimately, they need to take responsibility for the decisions that he or she makes. So similar to what they were talking about earlier, is I think that we tend to protect too much, and instead of letting our students make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, we don't even give them that chance to make the mistake. Or if they do, then there's a huge repercussion, and in an extreme case, the right could be taken away. So really making sure they understand what can happen if they happen to make, a bad decision, which we all do sometimes. So then just identifying some rights, just kind of scanning your room, scanning your class, and this goes along, again, with the activities in the workbook. Do you know what your rights are? You get to choose what kind of job you want. I get parents all the time that say, oh, you can just work at Publix down the street, that'll be so convenient. And the student's like, well, I don't want to work, they might not want to work there. So we have to remember that it's really ultimately the student's choice. And then the lovely touchy subject of the SSI check or even their paycheck, instilling in that student to have the confidence to say to a parent, especially once they turn 18 and they reapply, the check is in their name. So making sure students are comfortable with that, and then voting and making decisions about their everyday life. All right, so I just put this little pencil up here for my students to kind of signal to them that there's an answer on this sheet. So I kind of broke up self-determination into 4 principles for them. Freedom, control, responsibility, and support. And this just goes hand in hand with what they explain in the DA workbook. Sure.
You said reapply at 18. They have to go back in and reapply for those SSI benefits at 18?
Yes, and a lot of people don't know that. So families will call me and say, well, what happened? And they were never told that they need to reapply once they become an adult. And sometimes it can take a few times even. I've had to tell families, okay, go back and try again, which, that's fun. So yeah, we've got our 4 main principles that I just kind of broke it up into. So making sure our students know that they have as much freedom as anybody else to decide and make decisions that are best for their lives. It's not fair to limit them. They're just like everybody else. So just telling them that, hey, you have the freedom to make that decision. They have control, so they're the ones that should have control over the support that they need. They're the ones that should choose, like they were saying before, who's in their support circle. If they don't feel comfortable, even with a certain person in their family, being a part of making decisions with them, then, that's their decision. So making sure they understand that as well. The most fun part of being an adult, so responsibility. Like I said, I know one of my young ladies, when she heard she had the right to marry, she was so excited, and I looked over and Mom's face was like, ah. So just making sure students understand with the rights comes all that responsibility, which the DA workbook has some amazing activities and scenarios, and then I gave you guys some scenarios as well, just to give students that critical thinking piece, like, okay, well, what if I was in this situation, and what if this happened? So they do need to understand what the good or bad consequences may be of making a decision. And then again, I think the most important piece is developing that circle of support, because like we've been saying, guardianship should be the last resort, because they usually have so many people around them that are willing to help. And as long as they say, you know, Daniel says, sure, Mom, like, please help me with my finances. And like Amelia said, I asked my mom to help me with my finances, and I just bought a house. I could have never done that without my mom or dad. So building that circle of support and making sure that, you know, that circle of support is supporting them in the way that they want to live their life. Oh, and this is a big one. As far as coworkers go, I'm kind of between me and Abby. Abby teaches independent living skills, and I teach employment. So the best thing when I'm finding students jobs is finding that coworker as a natural support. You can usually kind of pick them out, people at the workplace that usually take an interest to our students and kind of take them under their wing, and that's been like my best friend. Like, I'll just seek someone out, and that, I mean, sometimes they don't even need a job coach because that person's there to help. And then just making sure why are we even learning about self-determination? So many of my students have goals and they want to move out, or they want to get a job, they want to get married one day, but they can't do it without self-determination skills. They have to be able to independently tell people what they want in their lives. I think our students get run over a lot by other people without even realizing it, and people just make decisions for them every day, and that's what they're used to. So they need to understand that if they want to achieve their goals, they have to have this skill. All right, so I kind of just split it up. I did self-determination first for them, and then of course that might take a few days. You might do some activities sprinkled in with that, but then we moved into the self-advocacy piece next. So again, I've got the little pencil. A self-advocate is pretty much just someone who knows how to speak up for themselves. That's all it is. So we did some really great activities where my students got a chance to practice speaking up. And one of the biggest things here is all of my students are in charge of tracking their own IEP goals, which sounds crazy, but it actually cuts your work in half as the teacher, and then it incorporates self-determination within that activity, and it teaches organizational skills. So I just thought of this, that's why I'm adding it in here. But we give our students, they all have a binder, they have their IEP in the front, and then they have tabs for the different domains of goals. And then as we do activities within those domains, they're actually the ones that organize and file them into their binders. And then at the end of the week, we kind of look and see, okay, how are you doing with your IEP goals? Let's look and see what you worked on this week. And that really, I didn't know how I was going to track 38 IEP goals. So that was kind of like a double whammy for me. And knowing what your accommodations are, knowing that it's okay to ask for help. So I know sometimes accommodations can be kind of just like a checkbox. I know on our system, it just kind of lists all these accommodations and you kind of pick and choose, but making sure that the students really understand what their accommodations are, and then even taking that information to the workplace and saying, you know, these are the accommodations I need to be successful at work. So again, a lot of self-checking, kind of making my students ask themselves, do you make your own decisions? Some of my students, when they first start, their moms are holding their hands and they've packed their lunch, and I'm like, oh, this is going to change. Like, we're going to teach you how to pack your lunch. You're going to feel like more independent. So just self-checking with students. Do you have these skills yet? All right, so that was kind of an example of just like a direct teaching activity that just kind of outlined how I instructed my students. And then now I'm going to jump into some guided practice activities. So we call our groups in our classroom, we call them families. So that's why it says, with your family, go through the scenarios given and decide. So I believe that this is one of your handouts I gave you. But for example, this would be a home life scenario that they would work out with their group. It is election season. Your family all love one candidate. However, that's not who you were planning to vote for. When your family goes to vote together, they are urging you to vote for their candidate. A lot of these scenarios are things that me and Abby have heard in our classroom, and then they just have to problem solve. What's the problem? Where is this taking place? Who can help me with this situation? There might be an outside family member that they could talk to. And what could you actually say? What could you actually verbally say to your family? And then we would practice that. So I gave you guys some scenarios that I used with my students. And again, it's important always to remember to represent different settings, because we know our students sometimes have a hard time generalizing. So they might think, well, great, I'm a self-advocate at school, but I might not be at home or whatever. So practicing a variety of different situations. So again, this happened to me. We do the recycling for our campus, and my student actually came up and said, hey, recycling sometimes hurts my back. And I felt horrible, but I was so proud that he came up to me and told me, I need an accommodation or whatever. So hopefully he learned that from us. So just some more scenarios. Again, you got a job at Publix, you're at orientation, your boss gives you a large packet of information, you're not a good reader. So again, asking for those accommodations at work and understanding how to tell your boss about that. Is this all making sense? Seem like good stuff to do? Okay, I hope so. And then role playing. So I know that I would give my students like little scripts. This is something that I love our VR counselor, but I mean, she has a huge caseload of students. So sometimes she's in my classroom trying to get them to sign documents, and I get a little nervous because I'm like, wait, did they fully understand everything you talked about? So this is another situation that I really I want to train my students on, making sure they ask to explain, what am I signing? What exactly does this mean? Can my teacher come in right now and help us so that she can help me understand, or whatever needs to be done? Again, just a teacher situation, and this would have to do with the IEP goals. When I was a practicum student and an intern, I got to observe so many different classrooms, and I saw some great examples, and then I saw some great non-examples, which I'm sure we all have seen. But I remember just seeing teachers say, here, sign your IEP. Do you guys, Anna and Daniel? So again, making sure that the student understands, especially if they're in there on their own, if they don't have a parent there, they've decided that they're the ones that want to be in there, they need to understand that, they can add a goal if they'd like. They can, tell the teacher, wait, I'd like to learn this. So making sure that the student really is in charge at the transition IEP. Again, the work scenario with the parent. And then, of course, always remember to administer some kind of independent practice and a post-test so you can see your gains. Sometimes we're rushing through our lessons and we forget, but that's how you're going to get your data. So an independent practice or post-test don't have to be anything formal. It could be a checklist of behaviors. I know that a lot of times, like for our interview skills, I have a list of interview skills and I watch them and I just kind of do a checklist. But data is your best friend, especially with parents and other professionals, so you can show those gains being made. Okay, so this is where I'm going to refer a lot to the Developing Abilities and Restoring Rights workbook. Again, I'm setting it up as the direct teaching, some guided practice activities to support the newly learned information, and then independent practice. All right, so just some tips for using the DA workbook. So, of course, before you jump in teaching about the specific laws, make sure you teach those basic concepts and legal status as it's laid out in the DA workbook. When they came and did the presentation with my class, the neglect, abuse, and exploitation piece, like, to me, was the best part. Just teaching our students how to say, I remember one of my students, she kept saying, and a firm no. So not just no, but do you remember that? A firm no, and I was so proud of her. And then remembering to differentiate the materials. So this is based on, someone that is able to read at a pretty nice level. Of course, you might be there helping them, but if you need to put extra images in or selecting pictures, whatever you need to do to reach the level of your student. And then you can either teach the workbook as part of a self-determination unit, or you could even sprinkle the lessons into other curriculum wherever they fit. So for example, I used one of the money management lessons from the workbook when I did my budgeting unit. So the great thing is, I know that there's a real push to teach more self-determination because we need to have those self-determination goals on our IEPs. But the great thing is, most of it fits into what you're already teaching. So look at what's in the workbook and then think how you can already work it in. And just a reminder, I use the DA workbook, and I have a few other materials on the back table that I brought as well. I also use the Stand Up For Me curriculum. Has anyone heard of Stand Up For Me? Yay! So the great thing about Stand Up For Me is it starts at the elementary level. So it starts teaching self-determination, and it works through elementary, middle, high, and post-secondary. And I love that about it. And that was developed by Project 10. So if you're interested in getting that for your district, I would contact them, and it's in the back if you want to look at it. If you're a teacher, you probably already know about Teachers Pay Teachers. It's my best friend. I have some of my products in the back will say this is a Teachers Pay Teachers product, so I did not develop it. But do not recreate the wheel. There's stuff out there, and I know that I have a Google Drive of all of my online materials. So if there is anything that you're thinking right now that you want to see if I already have it, just get with me after my presentation and I'll make sure that we connect. Okay? All right, so the example that I decided to choose for us was the right to decide the social aspects of life. So this starts on page 81 in the DA workbook, and I used that to guide my instruction, and I will show you guys how I did it. Because it's really hard, I know, for me to just sit down with a workbook with my students. They're not going to be, I love the workbook, but I have to add in additional engaging materials for it to make sense and, for them to understand the curriculum. So again, I just broke it down. So if I had a student that I know wasn't able to read through it, I would just pick out the important information, of course. So we're all happier when we connect and interact with others and have friends, right? Being able to choose your friends and what you do with your friends is your right when you turn 18. I know a lot of our students, the parents, of course, have great intentions, but they, have organized their social life. And our students might want to hang out with someone different that the parents maybe didn't have in mind, but ultimately that is their choice. And how can we make sure that our students have a happy, healthy social life? As a teacher, I think sometimes I forget about their outside life because I'm so focused on like our classroom activities and the lessons, but their social life is my social life is important to me. So I want to make sure that we do the same for our students. All right, so I picked out some key information from this right. So the right was about choosing your social life, okay? And then I picked to directly teach and practice key social skills listed in the workbook for listening and speaking. So this was one of the things that they really hit on in the workbook, and I love practicing social skills. It's like one of my favorite activities. These are some things that I did. Paired students up. I gave them a conversation topic and set a timer for 1 to 2 minutes. When time's up, had the students repeat back at least 3 things their partners said. So I know like sometimes our students are a little one-minded and they forget to listen to the other person when they're talking. And then this is an amazing game. Has anyone heard of Should I or Shouldn't I? I meant to look up, I left myself a note who developed it. I didn't have time to look it up. But it's on Amazon. It's a card game where students have to decide if certain behaviors are socially acceptable or not. So this is a really funny card, and we're all adults, so I know it's okay. But one of the cards says, you are in the grocery store and you see a woman with large breasts. You decide to walk up and ask her if they're real or not. So it's very real. I think the woman that made it obviously was a teacher and maybe used some things that her students had really said. I know I've heard one of my students at the grocery store, a woman had some facial hair on her chin, and he said she should be in the circus. So, I know, I need to write a book. But, and then another thing that they really hit hard for this, right? So again, I'm just breaking it up, is I directly taught and practiced what it meant to have a healthy friendship. And I can't stress this enough. How many times, yes, we see it out in the general setting, but within the ESE setting, within my own class, having those social boundaries and making sure you're not getting taken advantage of. See here, we just have those examples in our head, but on an index card, just coming up with different personality traits and sorting. Is this what you would want in a friend? This is not what you would want in a friend. Role-playing peer pressure and bullying with different scenarios. And again, having students practice saying no. I love doing scenario cards, as you can see, because I think it actually makes them, think of that situation and then learning how to handle it. And then just the last little chunk that I chose to teach concerning this, right, was directly teaching and practicing ways to meet people and to plan out your social life. So the workbook lays out a really great activity where it's like, who are some friends you have? Where are some places you'd like to go? How are you going to get there? Things like that. So one of my activities I did, and I did this with my budgeting unit, was I gave them a budget. I had them plan out a social outing, like looking up a movie. What time was it? How much money would you need? How are you going to get there? And it was kind of a nice little group project that incorporated a lot of different skills. So that was one of our activities that we did. And I think they forget how much work goes into planning a social activity, because sometimes they forget things, but I think that's a really good skill to know. Again, just a reminder, always make sure after you've done your direct teaching, your guided activities, and then you always do independent practice and you see those gains. Okay, so this is the part that we're super excited about. Before we do our role play, I'm going to show you guys a video, but I try to always remember to stay focused when I run my transition IEPs on person-centered planning, because person-centered planning and self-advocacy go hand in hand. Run an IEP meeting that actually focuses on the student. And really the student should be running the IEP meeting. They should be the ones who invited the people there, and then they're the ones that are deciding the goals, deciding what they want to work on and things like that. Again, of course, I usually have some ideas for goals when I get to the IEP based on what they need to work on. However, I still always get my parent and student input. So the way that Abby and I will set it up is we will have our laptop with the IEP program open, and then we have an either chart paper or a whiteboard with something similar, kind of like a web of ideas. And then I love it because it's just kind of an open flow of discussion. And I actually had an administrator tell me one time that my IEPs were taking too long, and I was like, oh no. I was like, they should be longer than 15, 20 minutes. So I think they should be as long as you need them to. So it should be an open flow of conversation, strengths and weaknesses, things like that. I'm just going to show a quick video that kind of guides how to kind of set up this process. Do you want to do it? Okay. Let's see if this works. But I just really like how it mapped out how the conversation should be had, and you see how that self-advocacy just goes hand in hand with person-centered planning, and that's really similar to like doing maps, if you guys have heard of maps or paths. Just as long as you're getting the students' ideas and everyone's input, and you're acknowledging the students' dreams. So let me scroll down. I think so. Okay, that's okay. That's good. Yeah, we're good. So again, I kind of draw a map out like I modeled over here, and I'll be referring to this when we role play the IEP. My IEPs look a little bit different, so anything that I do that would be considered academic, I do so in a functional way. So the only goals that we focus on are independent living, employment. If they need communication, we address communication, and sometimes that'll fit into this arena. But yeah, so we talk about the strengths and weaknesses from the student and parent, and then we just kind of jot down and make notes, and that's how we create those IEP goals. Okay, so like we said earlier, I asked Anna, this was my incredibility, I said, when would you have liked to have known about transfer of rights? And she said at Daniel's first transition IEP, so back in middle school, she would have liked to have already started learning about what's going to happen. So that is the information that I am telling you guys. When talking to parents about guardianship, this was also something that Anna helped me with because I am not a parent. But you need to acknowledge their emotions and concerns about this topic. Like Anna said, it was scary. It was concerning. She didn't know what was going to happen. And remember, you might spout off some information and then say, do you have any questions? And Anna said that was always tough because she didn't even know what questions to ask. So just front loading that information and educating about all the options. I'm actually going to request 50 copies of that Lighting the Way for my class, so I can start that off first thing this year. Address the student's abilities when determining what extent of support is needed. So like we said, guardianship should be the last resort decision. I probably wouldn't even maybe mention that word unless they bring it up, because you want to explore all of the other options before you explore guardianship. And then remember to access all the materials to help you as well. I know as an educator, I still get a little nervous for IEPs, and when people bring up questions about rights, before now, I kind of froze. And I'm sure a lot of educators feel like that because I was never trained. My school didn't do any training about transfer of rights or legal rights or anything like that. So until I got involved with these wonderful people, I really didn't know. Yes, so Anna's holding up the Educator's Guide. Woo woo, I'm so excited about this. The Educator's Guide for to legal rights. So these are the fact sheets, and I've just thrown some summaries up here. There's a student fact sheet, a parent fact sheet, and an educator fact sheet. So this is an amazing product that is going to help you navigate this process, and there's no better time to do it than in an IEP meeting. And me and Anna kind of decided it'd be great to send these home with the parent and student before the IEP is held. So kind of send it home, have them study it, and then when the IEP is held, ask them, okay, what concerns do you have? What areas do you need clarification for?